The man who had made the world laugh by becoming everyone else looked like he had forgotten how to be himself. Jim Carrey sat across from Jimmy Fallon in Studio 6B, his famous rubber face strangely still, his manic energy replaced by something quieter, more contemplative. The comedian who had built a career on transformation now seemed lost in the space between characters, searching for something that might no longer exist. Jimmy noticed it immediately. They'd been playing Deep Thoughts, a Tonight Show game where celebrities shared their most philosophical musings. For most guests, it was a chance to sound wise or profound. For Jim, it had become an unexpected journey into the labyrinth of his own consciousness. "All right, Jim, here's a deep one for you," Jimmy had said with his usual enthusiasm. "What's the most important thing you've learned about yourself in recent years? What truth have you discovered about who Jim Carrey really is?" The question should have been straightforward, a chance for some inspiring self-reflection or career wisdom. Instead, Jimmy watched as one of comedy's most distinctive performers seemed to disappear before his eyes, retreating into a place that looked both profound and deeply unsettling. "Jimmy," Jim said slowly, his voice carrying none of its usual animated energy, "that's the question that's been destroying me for years, because I don't think Jim Carrey exists." The confession landed in the studio like a stone dropped into still water, creating ripples of confusion and concern. This wasn't the manic, lovable Jim that audiences expected. This was something else entirely. "What do you mean?" Jimmy asked gently, sensing they were entering territory far deeper than typical late-night conversation. Jim looked directly at Jimmy, and his eyes held something that was part wisdom, part madness, part desperate searching. "I mean, I've played so many characters, worn so many masks, that when I try to find the real me underneath it all, there's nothing there, just empty space." The cameras continued rolling, but everyone in Studio 6B understood they were witnessing something unprecedented. A man who had spent his life becoming other people, questioning whether he had ever been anyone at all. Jimmy made a decision that would define this moment. He stood up from his desk and moved to sit directly next to Jim, sensing that this conversation required presence, not performance. "Jim, you're scaring me a little bit. Are you okay?" Jim smiled, but it wasn't one of his character smiles. It was something sadder, more real. "I don't know what okay means anymore, Jimmy. I don't know what anything means. That's what I'm trying to tell you." He leaned forward, his voice taking on an intensity that was both magnetic and concerning. "Think about it. From the time I was a kid, I was rewarded for being anyone except myself. Every laugh, every role, every moment of success came from disappearing into someone else." Jimmy nodded, beginning to understand the psychological maze Jim had found himself in. The Mask, Ace Ventura, The Truman Show, Eternal Sunshine. Jim continued listing his iconic roles like evidence in a case. All of these characters that people love, that brought me fame and fortune and recognition. But what if, in the process of becoming all of them, I erased myself? The audience was completely silent, transfixed by this unexpected philosophical journey. "When did you start feeling this way?" Jimmy asked. "It's been building for years," Jim admitted. "But it really hit me during a period when I wasn't working, maybe 5 years ago. I was alone in my house, no cameras, no audience, no character to play. And I realized I didn't know how to just be. I didn't know who I was when I wasn't being someone else." His voice grew more emotional. "I would stand in front of my bathroom mirror trying to find Jim Carrey, but all I could see were the ghosts of all the characters I'd ever played. The Grinch was there, Stanley Ipkiss was there, but Jim was nowhere to be found." Jimmy felt his heart break for the man sitting next to him. That must have been terrifying. "It was," Jim said simply. "Because if Jim Carrey doesn't exist, then what am I? Am I just a collection of performances? Am I just The universe playing a character called Jim Carrey? And if that's true, then everything I think I know about myself, about my life, about reality, it's all just another performance. The studio was dead silent, hanging on every word of this existential unraveling. Jimmy said carefully, do you think maybe the searching itself is who you are? Maybe the person who questions everything, who explores these deep ideas. Maybe that's Jim Carrey. Jim looked at Jimmy with something approaching hope. I've thought about that. But then I wonder, is that just another character? The philosopher, the seeker, the guy who asks the deep questions? Am I performing enlightenment the same way I performed comedy? He ran his hands through his hair, clearly frustrated by the circular nature of his thoughts. It's like I'm trapped in a hall of mirrors, Jimmy. Every time I think I've found the real me, I realize it might just be another reflection, another layer of performance. Jimmy was quiet for a moment, absorbing the depth of Jim's crisis. Can I ask you something? When you're creating art, when you're painting or writing or just thinking, how does that feel? Different, Jim said immediately, and for the first time in the conversation, something in his expression lightened. When I'm creating, I'm not trying to be anyone. I'm just flowing, letting something move through me without asking who it is or where it comes from. That sounds like the real you, Jimmy suggested. Maybe, Jim said, though doubt crept back into his voice. Or maybe that's just another mask, the artist, the creator, the deep thinker. How do I know the difference between authentic expression and sophisticated performance? Jimmy leaned closer. Jim, what if you're asking the wrong question? What if instead of who is Jim Carrey, the question is, what is consciousness itself? What if your crisis isn't personal, it's universal? Jim's eyes widened slightly. What do you mean? I mean, maybe everyone is just consciousness playing different characters. Maybe we're all just the universe experiencing itself subjectively. Maybe the reason you can't find Jim Carrey is because Jim Carrey was always just a story consciousness was telling itself. For the first time in the entire conversation, Jim laughed. Not a character laugh, not a performed laugh, but something that seemed to come from a place deeper than personality. You know what's funny? Jim said, his voice carrying a different energy now. Spending all this time wondering if I exist, I forgot to notice that something is definitely waiting here. Something is thinking these thoughts, asking these questions, having this crisis. Jimmy smiled. Right? The seeker exists even if what it's seeking is unclear. Exactly, Jim said, and something in his posture began to shift. Maybe the character I've been playing my whole life isn't Jim Carrey the comedian. Maybe it's Jim Carrey the person who thinks he needs to be someone specific. He addressed the audience directly, his voice carrying new clarity. If there's anyone watching this who feels like they've lost themselves in their roles, as parents, as professionals, as whatever identity they've built, maybe we're all in this together. His voice grew more passionate. Maybe the question isn't, who am I? Maybe the question is, what am I? And what we are might be something too vast and mysterious to fit into any single identity. The studio erupted in applause, but Jim raised his hand for quiet. I want to be careful here, he said, because I don't want this to sound like spiritual bypassing or New Age nonsense. The crisis is real. The confusion is real. The feeling of being lost is real. He paused, gathering his thoughts. But maybe being lost is okay. Maybe not knowing who you are is the most honest place to stand. Maybe all this searching, all this questioning, maybe that's not a problem to be solved. Maybe it's the adventure of being human. Jimmy stood up and embraced Jim. Not a show business hug, but a real moment of human connection. When they separated, Jimmy looked directly at his guest. Jim, thank you for sharing this journey with us. Thank you for showing us that it's okay to question everything, even yourself. Thank you for making it safe to not know who I am, Jim replied. 6 months later, Jim Carrey began speaking openly about consciousness, identity, and the nature of reality in his interviews. He started creating art that explored these themes, helping others navigate their own existential questions. He also began teaching workshops on what he called conscious comedy, humor that arose from awareness rather than performance. The Tonight Show segment became one of the most discussed pieces of content about identity and consciousness ever aired on late-night television. Philosophy professors began using Jim's questions in their classes, and therapists found his words helpful for clients struggling with identity issues. Jimmy said in later interviews that the conversation changed how he thought about selfhood and performance. Jim reminded me that maybe the goal isn't to find yourself, but to realize that the searcher and the sought might be the same thing. And Jim, he continued acting, continued creating, continued being one of entertainment's most unique voices. But now his work carried something different: the humility of not knowing, the courage to question everything, and the understanding that authenticity might not be about finding the real you, but about embracing the mystery of what you are. The man who had spent his life becoming everyone else had discovered something profound. Maybe there was no one specific to become. Maybe consciousness itself was the only actor, playing every part in the grand theater of existence. And in that realization, Jim Carrey, whatever that meant, found a kind of peace. Not the peace of answers, but the peace of finally being comfortable with the questions.